Okay, lovely. Thanks for bearing with us all. I appreciate it's been a long day and you've heard a lot of people talk. So I'll try to make this as interesting as possible, and really want to share with you the work that we've been doing on the TransPennine route upgrade and the role that heritage has been able to play in upgrading the 19th century railway infrastructure, but taking account 21st century needs. And this is really important for us to think about because this whole conference... Oh, sorry, I didn't want to... Can you hear me now? I've got a very loud voice anyway. I didn't want to be shouting at people. And basically, I think the whole theme of this conference is about how we're shaping the future, shaping our profession. And we really need to consider that. And we're hoping to touch on that through this. So just a reminder of who we are. I'm Katie Rees-Gill. I'm an Associate Director for Atkins Realis. Have been with the company now for nearly 20 years, and I put that down to the really interesting projects and opportunities I've had. My colleague Matthew Jenkins opened the session, and again, he's had a very good stint with the company coming up to nearly 10 years. So what we both want to run through today is an overview of the scheme. For those of you that don't know it, I'm going to talk about collaboration in its widest and truest form, and not just as a profession, but how we are seen by other disciplines and how we need to work with other disciplines and other organisations and specialists. Matt will be talking about embedded design and a particular case study of Huddersfield Station, which is grade 1 listed. And then we're going to round the session with questions on both projects and both presentations. So the TransPennine route upgrade, or TRU, is from Manchester, Victoria in the west through to York Selby in the east. And we've been engaged in what's called the West of Leeds area of the project, which you can see highlighted in blue. So Manchester, Victoria, just shy of Leeds Station. And this presentation today is focused on the area outlined in green, which is from Huddersfield Station through to Dewsbury. And you can see the little sort of schematic or little map that we've got there on the right-hand side. Just shows you the 9 listed structures that we've been managing as part of this upgrade. So we've been involved in the project since 2017, and a whole raft of documents had to be produced at the beginning of this, including the Statement of Significance for Huddersfield Station, but also the environmental statement and heritage statements to accompany the listed building consents. The Transport and Work Act order was submitted in March 2021. And then at the end of that year, there was a public inquiry. The order was granted in June 2022, and also conditions, the listed building consent with conditions and team planning permission. And then the order came into force in November of that year. We've been discharging those conditions since November 22, and construction commenced in the spring of 23. And I just want to show here the range of partners and collaborators and specialists that are involved in the project. And we've had to be able to communicate and engage with all of these people. And it's right that we've been doing that. But as you can imagine, that's quite complicated and shows that there's a diverse range of specialists and knowledge and partners that are engaged in these big mega infrastructure projects. And this is really just to demonstrate the amount of literature that gets produced as part of these projects, which won't be a surprise to you. But we're producing this literature. We have to find a way of communicating this to those other specialists and partners. We can't expect them to be reading it and understanding it in the detail that we do. So I'm going to talk now a little bit more detail about the collaborative approach that we've taken, how successful we think that's been, and how that's really helped to shape design of this project and really influence the delivery and implementation of it. So I want to start by saying early engagement is absolutely vital. We've got to be invited to the party. We've got to have that seat at the table. And we've got to have clients such as Network Rail, such as National Highways, wanting us to be part in the early stages of these schemes, and that they feel that we can make a valuable contribution to that early concept, optioneering and design that's needed. And it gives us an opportunity to find our voice and to voice our concerns and help in de-risking. And it's really important that we think about how we can position ourselves at the very early start and engagement of these projects. One of the key things that we did was advocating for stakeholder engagement, particularly statutory stakeholders. And luckily, our client, Network Rail, were fully on board with this. And again, that allowed us to have hear their voice, and they were able to contribute to the process too, which made it far more meaningful. It meant they had buy-in, they understood the project more thoroughly and felt that they were part of the process. When we're engaged in these projects, we are the specialists. We are the heritage, historic environment, archaeologist specialists. And we need to make sure that we understand what we're talking about, and we do our homework very thoroughly. And that means that we understand the heritage values and we understand the significance. And two of the key documents that unlocked that for us was the Huddersfield Station Statement of Significance, which Atkins Realis wrote in 2018, and then the route-wide Statement of Significance produced by Alan Baxter's. So it's important that we collaborate within the profession and with other colleagues and other consultancies to produce these works. And a key area was in understanding constraints or issues from the outset. And you can see on the left-hand side, we've got some lovely pictures of two bridges. These are the Calder and Hebble Canal and the River Calder underbridges. They were designed by Thomas Granger. They are cast iron, built within the heroic age of railway building in the UK, 1841 to 50. And they are some of the oldest cast iron bridges in operation in the world. The picture on the bottom left-hand side, you might be able to see some bracing, and these bridges have already been subject to structural supports needed to keep them in operational use. It became apparent very early on that these structures weren't going to be able to accommodate the needs of the TRU programme. Faster, longer, more trains travelling over them, they would just not be able to withstand that wear and tear. So we had to have very honest conversations with those engineers and designers about what we could do. And so the decision was made that, regrettably, these structures would come out of operational use, not ideal because that contributed to their significance, but that a new bridge, a new railway to the south would be designed, connecting into the TRU route with a new bridge. And that allowed us then to have a very early opportunity to talk about the design of that new structure, about the setting of these bridges, about how could we ensure that the legibility and historic importance of these bridges was still maintained. So we do need to consider that. In the true spirit of collaborating, it's not just us voicing our concerns and speaking, we also need to be listening. And we need to understand the project goals and challenges of these types of mega infrastructure projects. It's not about being a heritage specialist in isolation, in our silos. We need to understand the engineering language. We need to understand when engineers are speaking to us, what actually they're saying, what are they conveying, what are the design drivers that we need to appreciate and where the constraints are. So it's important that we open our ears and we sit down and listen to those other specialists, to those designers, and appreciate what they're trying to do. In this project, one of the most important elements, I thought, and very interesting, was Network Rail were keen on what they called the collaboration workshops, which brought all the specialists together to talk about how they work, how they operate, how they think about problems, how they discuss and disseminate information. And this wasn't about trying to create a template and one size fits all. It was very much about appreciating that we work differently, we think differently, and appreciating that diversity and incorporating that into our day-to-day relationships working on this project. And as a profession, if we really want to shape our future, we need to think about being solution-focused. I've lost count of the many times when I've been involved in projects where I've heard client or other specialists say to me, we didn't want to involve heritage because we knew you'd be a problem. We knew that you'd cause us issues. We didn't want to deal with you straight away because it was going to be too traumatic. And it's just not the perception we need. And we need to change that perception because they've obviously got that from somewhere. So as a body and as a profession, we need to start thinking about how can we be more collaborative? How can we be more approachable? How do we get that invitation to the party to come join these mega projects very early on? Because it's important that we do and that our voice is heard. And then that allows us to be involved in multidisciplinary decisions, in actually designing, in actually de-risking, in actually considering how we can think of another approach and for people to take that on board. And as well as that, we shouldn't just be thinking about ourselves in isolation. We should be thinking about our contribution to this world and what we're doing. We need to think about community benefits. We need to think about the social value that we can bring. We need to think about sustainability. And we need to be thinking about helping our clients reach targets such as carbon net zero. Stakeholders, I've mentioned their involvement, and it's important that when we give them the opportunity to be involved and give them their voice, that we actually do listen to what they're saying. It's not a tick box exercise, that their contribution is valid. And we're very good at facilitating that. We're very good at bridging that gap between construction teams, between designers, engineers, architects, and our professional community. So we need to continue to do that and to have that role because that's something we're doing really well. And we need to be flexible. Not everything on schemes of this nature are going to stay as is assumed and as is planned. There will be new needs, there will be changes. And one such change we had on this project was the building you can see on the bottom right-hand side. This was a building within Huddersfield Station sidings, and we recognised it was out of use, probably a storeroom. We recognised that it could come into use as a power supply point that was needed as part of the electrification of the railway. However, the internal configuration of this building didn't fit the equipment needed. We agreed to get consent. It wasn't listed, it was curtilage listed, I should say. And we agreed consent with working with the local authority to dismantle this building, house the equipment and then re-establish it, re-erect it in consideration of its style and character. We also need to think about how we can be imaginative and innovative. How can we do things that make these projects run smoother and actually bring benefits? And one of the successful parts of this project has been the implementation of the Conservation Implementation Management Plans, or CIMPs, as we've called them for short. Working with Network Rail, Kirklees Council Conservation Team, and Historic England, we came up with this approach, which would allow us to discharge conditions in a manner, in a phased manner of partial discharge, so we could align with the construction sequencing of the project and enable the scheme to be delivered and proceed. That's really, really important that we're able to do that and that all parties agreed to this approach. It was tabled at public inquiry, we got buy-in, and that has been one of the most successful elements. So, for example, Huddersfield Station, which Matt will come on to talk in a little while, that has had 5 rounds of SIMPs because of the complexity of the construction work and the amount of conditions we need to discharge as part of that work. But it's proved effective, efficient, and we've been able to work very closely with Kirklees Council in delivering that. So I'm just going to have a slurp of water. Thank you. We also need to think about our role in the ongoing story. We were able to do that at Hill House Sidings in Huddersfield, where you can see this lovely turntable, not as attractive obviously as the one at Curzon Street in Roundhouse, but still it was something that we were pleased to discover as part of the archaeological works and were able to share as part of the story of the railway. I've been given a 1-minute warning, so I'm going to try and speed up. But another important element that I really want to get across is that we need to think about agreeing change and loss and being pragmatic about this and open and honest in our conversations. So the top right-hand picture is Huddersfield Viaduct, span 29, Bradford Northgate Road. Here, the viaduct was expanded in the 1880s. You have the 1840 arch still in place, expanded in the 1880s, but it was expanded with metallic girders and parapets, no longer in suitable enough condition to be repaired or retained as part of the TRU scheme. However, in recognition of this loss, that we'd have to remove this and replace with a concrete parapet, we brought in the idea of having a relief design within that concrete parapet, which reflected the metal spans that were going to be lost. So we'd continue to acknowledge that legibility of development and change. And one of the structures on the route, Wheatley's Overbridge, which is on the bottom right-hand side, this is an ASG bridge, originally in the 1840s and expanded in the 1880s. Unfortunately, due to the tracking needed through this area and the accommodation of overhead line equipment, this bridge could not accommodate those changes, despite very strong optioneering and processes that we went through, such as track lowering, bridge jacking, etc. We were able to bring parties involved and regrettably agree the loss of this structure, but it also gave us the opportunity then to work with designers about the new structure that would take the place of this. And we've got a visualization of that on the bottom left, which is replicating the industrial heritage of this area, and particularly the colliery that's found there. And I'm going to leave with some pretty pictures of some of the interpretation we've been doing. It's very important as well that we communicate to the public that we're involved in these projects, that heritage has a role. It's important that the part that we've played and that they get to appreciate the work that we've done and the heritage that's on their doorstep. And these are some of the interpretation banners that have been put up at Huddersfield Station and Mirfield Station. Thank you for listening. I'm going to hot-foot it to Matt.
Thank you, Casey. We are running slightly behind time, so I've left my notes over there and I'm just going to talk off the cuff and concentrate on the time. as Katie says, I'm going to kind of present essentially a case study within a case study, looking specifically at Huddersfield Station. The process that Katie kind of described enabled the designers and the design process to respond to heritage significance in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have done on other projects. And that was partly aided by embedding heritage professionals within the design team developing the scheme. And Huddersfield's a prime example of that. It's a good case study in itself because it's a confluence of both the most significant heritage asset on the scheme, being Grade 1 listed, one of the few Grade 1 listed stations in the country. And it's also the most critical element in terms of the operational aims of the scheme, in terms of the things that Network Rail needed to do and deliver in order to get the improvements and public benefit that the scheme requires. From the statement of significance, one of the areas that we were able to identify that was of particular significance to the station is the roofs, which you can see on the left-hand picture. Let's be fair, they don't look like much, but actually they are quite important. They're a rare surviving example of what's known as a Euston Truss, named after Euston Station. This was a type of roof that was used throughout the country quite heavily in the late 19th century, particularly by the London North Western Railway Company, LNWR. The survival of these is relatively slim. There are not many left, and Huddersfield represents the largest example in terms of width of span. The roof that you can see on the right-hand side there, which is referred to in the project as Roof A, the principal roof span, in particular is noted for its rarity. I said about the criticality of the sort of operational intervention at the station. One of the key things that the scheme needed to do was enable greater train movement from one track to another through the station, as well as providing additional and longer platforms. The upshot of that is essentially what you see on the plan at the bottom of the screen there, which is that the station needs to move to the north towards the viaduct that abuts it, and that there needs to be additional space between the tunnel portal of Huddersfield Tunnel on the south side and the beginnings of the platform. Obviously, there is a constraint there, which is the roofs themselves, that they come close to that area. If this station wasn't listed, it was non-historic, those roofs probably would simply be removed. But obviously we knew we couldn't do that because of their contribution they make to the significance of the Grade 1 listed building. So we were heavily involved in an optioneering process to try and reduce the impact on the roofs as far as reasonably practicable and find solutions that can lead to the retention of heritage significance and that contribution that they made. The upshot of that was a decision to regrettably remove the smaller span of the roofs, Roof B and C, and also 2 bays of the end of the principal Roof A. But to retain the rest of the Roof A span, and importantly to look at opportunities to enhance it and better reveal its significance and the significance of the station as a result, as well as improve passenger comfort through doing that. So the works to remove the end bays of Roof A have already been completed, which is what the photo is up there. This is a snapshot of the work that's being undertaken at the moment on the roof. So the design team within the TRU West Alliance at Arup, alongside ourselves, developed a scheme design that looked at strengthening and refurbishing the retained section of Roof A. In order to improve passenger comfort within the station and coverage of the station, we also have reinstated the lantern that originally went along the top of the structure. That's not literally reinstated it, that's as in we've designed one that draws from the original design. There's an extensive scheme of recolouring and repainting of the underside of the structure, again to enhance the underside of it and the passenger experience, as well as improving the passenger environment generally through lighting, etc. This is an artist's impression from the architects on the project, what it will look like at the end, which if you kind of compare that with the image in your head that you saw originally, I'm sure you'll agree is a bit of an improvement on what is there currently. Another element that's required is actually the extension of the roof, or rather providing passenger coverage at the northern end of the roof. Again, this has been chosen to be done in a sympathetic modern intervention, so using a portal frame rather than an exact replica of the Euston Truss. We didn't want something that was pastiche, but instead draws on the design in a way where if you look down the roof in its length, you wouldn't necessarily notice any difference, but the closer you get, you've got that legibility of it being an additional intervention. Obviously, if you take away roofs, you need to replace them, really. You can't leave passengers out in the rain, particularly in Huddersfield, where it can tell you it rains a lot. So there were some key interventions that were required of new infrastructure in at the station, namely new canopies to replace the roofs being removed, and also a new footbridge to aid passenger movement across the station. That was partly driven by an understanding of what's known as ped flow, which is pedestrian flow, so how people move around a station space, but also planning for increasing numbers of services and hopefully increasing passengers in the future. There was a conscious choice made for kind of honest and modern intervention. So looking at something which wasn't at risk of being pastiche, didn't draw too heavily from the historic, but which did actively respond to it and aim to not overwhelm the station in the way that it responds to the existing historic infrastructure. So looking at the new canopies, the design of that looked at using geometry which responds to the main roof, so drawing from setting out points, looking at how the angles of the original roof work. Importantly, roofs which remain subordinate to the main span, so the retained historic element remains the sort of key span of that roofs. And also takes that opportunity to maintain and enhance visual connectivity out to the back of the station. On the left-hand side of the diagram there, you can see the sort of outline of the edgeable warehouse. That's also that's grade 2 listed. There's another grade 2 listed warehouse adjacent to it, and there's the opportunity to ensure that these canopies sort of enhance that connectivity and people's appreciation of the wider landscape. It was chosen to do them in a modern blade form. This is a common form of canopy at stations that are constructed in the 21st century in sort of rail infrastructure, but all the geometry of those blades was drawn from responding to the key elements of the main roof, so that from the main platforms you get a view across out through the in between the two blades themselves, and the blades have the same angular geometry as the key retained section of the roof. With the footbridge, there was an appreciation that the footbridge would need to be introduced within the immediate setting of the station, so at the northern end of the station. So again, we wanted to ensure that it minimised the impact on setting as much as possible by being essentially as lightweight and see-through as possible. Footbridges at stations, particularly those where there are electrified overhead lines, are very heavily constrained by standards driven by safety of passengers. So this means that the footbridge needs to achieve a certain number of criteria. So it needs to be entirely enclosed and covered, both to protect passengers from the weather, but also to protect passengers from the electrified lines underneath them. It also needs to have stairs of a certain length and angle, and have lifts as well on all sections from all platforms, in order to ensure that persons with reduced mobility can access across the station easily. So the team set about designing a fully glazed footbridge. We then discovered through an environmental assessment of this that the angle of the footbridge means that on a sunny day, if you entirely glaze the footbridge with a flat glazing, you would essentially blind train drivers as they pulled up to their positions in the station, because it reflects the sun straight back underneath the canopy. So in order to address that, we looked at, could we do something that, again, relates back to the heritage of the station whilst also combating that issue? So again, we came up with a sort of sawtooth, design team came up with a sawtoothed approach to the glazing, which directs the sun away from the core of the station, and again, actually draws on the geometry of the station roofs. It still can therefore be largely glazed and as lightweight as a footbridge possibly can be in this sort of situation, but still avoids kind of any issues with that. Something else that we were able to do through that was the fact that where the footbridge is positioned and the position of the glazing means that as you walk across the footbridge, you'll be able to actually get a view close up of the historic station roof. So it actually introduces additional appreciation of that element of the historic architecture that people don't currently get. Similarly, in front of Huddersfield Station is St George's Square, which is one of the most important locations within the town of Huddersfield, and is also of intrinsic importance to the setting of the station because there was an integral historic chronology development link between the station and the square. And this footbridge will actually enable views out over the station building into the square, which you, again, don't currently have in the station. The final element that I'll touch on is the tea rooms and refreshment rooms on the station. So this building is another example of a rare surviving timber boarded tea room dating from the 1880s. This was another, a bit like the roofs, a relatively common thing that you see on stations in the late 19th century, but is increasingly rare. The Huddersfield example is notable further because of the slight sort of classical motifs in the design of it, but also the fact that it's actually retained its original use completely. So it has a refreshment room at one end and waiting rooms and toilet facilities. The layout, as you can see from the schematic there, has changed somewhat. It's quite the colourful phasing plan, but the overall kind of understanding of that building's position within the station and its role within the life of the station is retained today from when it was first built in the 1880s. This building was another element, a bit like the roofs, where when you make the platform adjustments in order that are required, the building is too close to the platform edge. So we needed to do something with the building in order to address that issue. Now, obviously, again, we don't want to sort of truncate the building in any way or change its architecture, which might detract from it. So we essentially looked at, could you lift the building up and entirely move the whole building and retain its position on the platform and slide it across the platform? That was too difficult to achieve, but what the next best option would be is, given it's timber boarded, to take the entire thing to pieces, store it, recondition it, and rebuild it in its entirety in its external form as it is today. So the design team have actually taken that forwards and looked at how to do that whilst also implementing improvements to the building to enhance its operational use. So these are some of the images from the work that has been done to deconstruct the building. This has been led by conservation architects from Arup and specialist contractors from Heritage Project Contracts, HPC, who've been heavily involved in this process. So you can actually see there the tea rooms in sort of half deconstructed state. It has now completely disappeared. So if you go to Huddersfield Station today, there's no tea rooms because it's all in a warehouse in Shropshire, being reconditioned, and it will be rebuilt when the scheme is complete. It'll be located slightly closer to the roof A columns in order to position it in appropriate position in relation to the platform edges. And it also will be adapted and improved, so it will have improved fire engineering implemented in it to protect it. There will be increased energy efficiency measures within it. The servery in it is being changed slightly, and the entire building in its relationship kind of spun round through 180 degrees in order to embed the refreshment room more within the heart of the station to get people to use it more and to hopefully appreciate that element of significance a little bit more. This element of the scheme in particular has received great acclaim from Historic England and Kirklees Council's conservation team, and it's been fantastic to sort of see this project come along alongside them. I'm going to skip over those two slides because we're running short on time and just come to a bit of a conclusion. So measures on the kind of success of the approach at Huddersfield Station. I say so far because the scheme is only sort of 2 years old in terms of construction and has got 3 or 4 years to go. Consenting wise, there were no objections to the listed building consent for the works to the station. That included no objection from Historic England. Indeed, Historic England were actively supportive of the proposals, and all LBCs related to the station have been granted, and conditions are being discharged at the moment, as Katie mentioned. We've had ongoing collaborative engagement with stakeholders, as I touched on, in terms of that relationship with Historic England and Kirklees Council is very positive and ongoing. There's also been really effective internal relationships between ourselves as a consents and heritage team and the design teams, the construction teams working on the scheme at the station. Again, that kind of continues on a weekly basis in terms of our engagement with them and site visits and meeting on site to discuss how works are going. And the best practice from this section of the scheme is being taken forward to wider sections of the TRU project. And of course, the emerging realised design itself is testament to the success of this element of the scheme. So the design approach that we've implemented here has really been successful in unlocking both the wider project objectives of a station which will deliver improved rail services across this section of the north of England, but also achieve quality outcomes for the historic environment by embedding that understanding early on in the process and shaping design accordingly. And going back to the overall arc and overall theme of the conference in terms of shaping the future of our profession, we feel that this is the sort of project where we're going to be able to take lessons learned from this and embed them on other projects, particularly that early embedding of heritage understanding within the design process by actively engaging designers, listening to them, sharing ideas, and coming up with collaborative approaches which respond successfully and positively to the heritage significance of structures and archaeology.